The joke had seemed harmless at the time. Standing in the shadow of the Blackthorn Estate's towering iron gates, surrounded by a crowd of fortune-seeking nobles and thrill-chasing merchants, I thought myself clever. The annual Crimson Gala was notorious throughout the Seven Kingdoms, a night when the reclusive Valcrest family opened their ancestral manor to outsiders, when mortals could glimpse the legendary beauty and power of the vampire aristocracy without fear of being drained dry. At least, that was the promise scrawled across the velvet invitations that had circulated through every tavern and trading post from Ashenmoor to the Silverbright coast. I was neither noble nor merchant. I was a cartographer by trade, a wanderer by nature, someone who'd spent the better part of 3 decades mapping forgotten roads and cataloging the ruins of civilizations that predated even the vampire bloodlines. My invitation had come by accident, or perhaps by fate, tucked inside an ancient tome I'd purchased from a dying scholar in the port city of Ravenhollow. The old man's last words still echoed in my memory: "Go to the gala, mapmaker. Some territories cannot be charted with ink and parchment alone." I dismissed it as the rambling of a fever-addled mind. But curiosity, that eternal curse of my profession, had driven me here nonetheless. The estate itself was a monument to immortal ambition. Gothic spires clawed at the night sky like fingers reaching for a moon they could never grasp. Stone gargoyles perched on every corner, their eyes glinting with something more than reflected starlight, as if consciousness itself had been carved into their granite flesh. Crimson banners bearing the Valcrest crest, 3 intertwined roses dripping with blood, hung from every pillar, fluttering in a wind that seemed to originate from nowhere and everywhere at once. The architecture spoke of eras long past, of a time when vampires didn't hide their nature behind treaties and trade agreements, when they ruled openly and without apology. The courtyard was a spectacle of controlled chaos. Hundreds of guests milled about in their finest attire, their nervous laughter punctuating conversations that danced around the obvious. We were prey pretending to be equals, moths drawn to a flame that could incinerate us on a whim. Servants moved through the crowd with trays of wine. Mortal wine, thankfully, not the blood wine the vampires favored, and the air thrummed with an energy that was part excitement, part terror. I'd found myself near a fountain carved from obsidian, its waters running red in a display that was either enchantment or extremely poor taste. A group of merchants had clustered nearby, their conversation loud enough to draw attention from half the courtyard. "Heard Lord Valcrest himself hasn't been seen in 50 years, one was saying, a portly man whose jewelry suggested either great success or catastrophic debt. "Some say he's entered the long sleep. Others claim he's hunting in the far wastes." "Doesn't matter," another replied, a woman whose silk gown probably cost more than my entire year's earnings. "It's his daughters who truly rule this territory. The Valcrest sisters. The Crimson Triad. The 3 fates of the night court," someone finished, their voice dropping to a reverent whisper. "I've heard stories. They say the eldest can break a man's will with a single glance. The middle sister supposedly seduced an entire royal family into destroying themselves. And the youngest, they say she once painted the walls of her chamber with the blood of an army that dared march on these grounds." The conversation had devolved into speculation and increasingly lurid tales, each story more fantastical than the last. I'd listened with the detached amusement of someone who'd spent years separating folklore from fact, who'd learned that the most dangerous legends were often the most mundane truths wrapped in theatrical embellishment. That's when someone had asked the question that would alter the trajectory of my life. "So, are any of you here hoping to catch the eye of one of the sisters? They say the Valcrests occasionally take companions. Mortals granted extended life in exchange for their loyalty." The group had erupted in nervous denials and forced laughter. No one wanted to admit they'd come with such hopes, though the gleam in several eyes suggested otherwise. And I, ever the fool, had felt compelled to contribute to the conversation. "Not me," I'd said with a shrug and a smile I'd intended to be self-deprecating. "I'm quite content with my single status. No entanglements, no complications. Just me, my maps, and the open road." The words had barely left my lips when the temperature dropped. Not gradually. Not the natural cooling that comes with nightfall. This was instant, brutal, as if the very concept of warmth had been banished from the courtyard. My breath materialized in front of my face, tiny crystals of ice forming in the exhalation. Around me, conversation stuttered and died. The fountain's waters froze mid-flow, suspended in impossible crystalline spirals. The crowd had parted like a sea before 3 ships of legend. They materialized from the shadows, not walking, but simply existing where they hadn't been a heartbeat before. The mist that perpetually clung to the estate grounds swirled around them like living things, caressing the hems of their garments, wrapping around their forms with possessive affection. The first sister was impossible to ignore. She stood tallest among them, her presence commanding the courtyard with the casual authority of someone born to rule. Crimson hair cascaded down her back in waves that seemed to move independent of the wind, each strand catching the moonlight like spun rubies. Her eyes glowed with inner fire, not metaphorically but actually glowed, twin embers of scarlet that fixed on me with laser focus. She wore a black leather corset that looked like it had been forged rather than sewn, silver Gothic accents running along its surface in patterns that hurt to look at directly, as if the designs were carved from congealed starlight. But it was her wings that truly stole the breath from my lungs, vast, magnificent structures of membrane and bone that extended from her back, easily 20 feet from tip to tip, their surfaces etched with veins of crimson that pulsed with her heartbeat. Or whatever vampires had instead of heartbeats. The second sister was her opposite in every way that mattered, yet no less commanding. Where the first was fire, she was ice. Pale hair, not blonde, not silver, but the white of fresh snow and virgin marble, flowed around her like water, defying gravity in subtle ways that suggested enchantment. Her violet eyes held depths that promised either salvation or damnation, possibly both simultaneously. The dark velvet gown she wore seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating a void around her form that made it difficult to determine where she ended and the shadows began. Her wings matched her sister's in size but differed in texture, their membranes appearing almost translucent, shot through with veins of deep purple that created mesmerizing patterns. The third sister was chaos personified. Shorter than her siblings, she nonetheless radiated danger like a forge radiated heat. Raven hair cut short framed a face that managed to be beautiful and terrifying in equal measure, especially when she smiled and revealed fangs that were just slightly too long, too sharp, too present to be anything but a threat. Her outfit looked like it had survived battles, because it had, I would later learn, a torn and modified ensemble that bore crimson markings I couldn't identify but instinctively recognized as warning signs. Her wings were darker than her sister's, almost black, with red veins that glowed like cracks in volcanic rock. They had crossed the courtyard in what felt like both an eternity and an instant. Every eye followed their progress. Every breath held. The crowd might as well have been a collection of statues for all the movement they made. And they were coming straight for me. I'd had perhaps 3 seconds to process this fact before they reached me. 3 seconds to wonder what I'd done wrong, what ancient protocol I'd violated, what offense I'd committed that would warrant the personal attention of the legendary Valcrest sisters. 3 seconds before my life changed forever. The eldest sister reached me first, her hand closing around my right arm with a grip that was firm without being painful, possessive without being cruel. Her skin was cool against mine, but not corpse cold as folklore suggested, more like marble that had been kept in shadow, retaining a memory of warmth even in its absence. "Single?" she said, her voice carrying across the silent courtyard despite being barely above a whisper. How convenient. The middle sister claimed my left arm with equal swiftness, her touch gentler but somehow more invasive, as if her fingers were reading the secrets written in my pulse. And here we were, just discussing how tiresome it is to deal with mortals who come with attachments, complications, prior claims. The youngest sister didn't bother with my arms. Instead, she materialized directly behind me, her chin coming to rest on my shoulder, her breath cool against my ear. "You said no entanglements, right? That's practically an invitation. Do you have any idea how rare unattached mortals are at these gatherings? Everyone comes with lovers, families, ambitions, baggage." I'd opened my mouth to respond, though what I would have said I honestly couldn't guess. When the eldest sister leaned in close enough that I could see the individual facets of color in her crimson eyes, the way they shifted from ruby to garnet to something darker and more ancient. "I am Seraphine Valcrest," she announced, not to me but to the entire courtyard, her voice carrying the weight of formal declaration. "First daughter of House Valcrest, commander of the Night Guard, keeper of the Crimson Seal. And I claim first right of courtship." The middle sister's grip on my arm tightened fractionally. "Morgana Valcrest," she countered, her tone silky and dangerous. "Second daughter, mistress of the Shadow Veil, keeper of forbidden knowledge. I invoke equal right by the law of simultaneous claim." Ravenna Valcrest, the youngest sister, practically purred in my ear, her fangs grazing my earlobe just enough to send a shiver down my spine. "Third daughter, the Storm's daughter, the Blade of House Valcrest. And I don't care about formal claims, I just think he's interesting." The courtyard had erupted in whispers. I caught fragments of shocked conversation, gasps of disbelief, the sound of someone's wine glass shattering against stone. Did they just? All three of them? Never seen them agree on anything, let alone? That poor bastard doesn't know whether to be terrified or honored. To be entirely honest, I didn't know either. Seraphine's smile could have melted steel. "You joked about being single. The universe has a sense of humor, mortal. So do we." Her wings extended slightly, creating a wall of crimson membrane that blocked the view from half the courtyard, creating an intimate space in the midst of chaos. "So here's the situation. You've caught our attention. All of us. Simultaneously. Do you understand how unprecedented that is?" Morgana's free hand came up to trace a line along my jaw, her touch raising goosebumps despite the coolness of her skin. "We haven't agreed on anything in centuries. Art, politics, philosophy, the proper temperature for blood wine, we're divided on everything. But you," her violet eyes searched mine, looking for something I wasn't sure I possessed. "You're different. Interesting. Unafraid." "I'm terrified," I managed to say, my voice only shaking slightly. Ravenna laughed, the sound like breaking glass and silver bells. "Oh, he has a sense of humor and honesty. See, I told you he was interesting." Her arms wrapped around my waist from behind, her chin still on my shoulder. "Most mortals either fawn over us or flee. You're just standing here. Processing. Thinking. I can practically hear the gears turning in that mortal mind." Seraphine cocked her head, studying me with the intensity of a predator evaluating prey, except there was something else in her gaze, something almost like curiosity. "What's your name, mapmaker? And yes, we know what you are. Did you think we invite people to our home without knowing exactly who they are?" "Aldrich," I said, because lying seemed both pointless and suicidal. "Aldrich Thorne. And if you know I'm a cartographer, then you know I'm nobody special. Just someone who charts territories and catalogs ruins." "Just," Morgana repeated, her violet eyes narrowing. "You've mapped places that don't appear on any official registry. You've documented civilizations that the world has forgotten. You've walked into cursed ruins and emerged with knowledge that others died trying to obtain. Your journals are traded in certain circles for prices that would make merchants weep with envy. That information should have been private. The fact that they knew it meant their information network was far more extensive than I'd imagined." Ravenna's grip tightened slightly. "You also turned down an offer to become court cartographer for the King of Ashenmoor. Refused 3 different noble houses who wanted to hire you exclusively. You could have been wealthy, safe, settled. But you chose the road. The unknown. The adventure." Her voice held genuine appreciation. "Why?" The question was so unexpected, so normal compared to everything else happening, that I answered honestly. "Because maps are lies." All 3 sisters went still. "Explain," Seraphine commanded, though her tone held intrigue rather than offense. I gestured vaguely, as much as I could, with both arms held by immortal creatures of the night. "Maps pretend the world is fixed, knowable, conquered. You chart a river and the next year it changes course. You mark a city and a decade later its ruins. You claim to define a border, and people who live there laugh because they've never acknowledged it. Every map is just someone's attempt to freeze a moment of infinite change, To claim understanding of something fundamentally unknowable. Then why make them? Morgana asked, and I realized the entire courtyard was listening, the vampire's supernatural presence carrying our voices to every ear present. Because the attempt matters, I said. Because even if we can't capture truth perfectly, we can capture enough of it to help others navigate. A flawed map is better than no map. An honest admission of uncertainty is more valuable than false certainty. Silence stretched across the courtyard. I'd said something significant, though I wasn't entirely sure what. Seraphine's smile changed, becoming less predatory and more genuine. You understand impermanence. The futility and necessity of trying to define chaos. Most mortals live their brief lives pretending stability exists. She glanced at her sisters. He gets it. He does, Morgana agreed softly. The endless dance between knowing and unknowing. The acceptance that all charts must eventually be redrawn. Ravenna laughed again, but this time the sound was delighted rather than mocking. And here I just thought he had a nice voice and interesting scars. Her finger traced a line on my forearm, an old wound from a collapsed ruin in the Whispering Wastes. This one's from a structural failure. This one, her finger moved to another scar. From a blade. You're careful, mapmaker, but not careful enough to avoid all danger. If I wanted perfect safety, I'd have stayed in the capital, I said, finding my footing in this bizarre situation. But then I'd have missed seeing the floating gardens of Velthara before they sank into the sea. The crystal caves of Northmarch before the veins went dark. The Temple of Winds before it was destroyed by the Purge, Seraphine interrupted, her eyes widening fractionally. You were there? That temple was obliterated 15 years ago. The entire region is a dead zone now. I was there 2 weeks before it fell, I confirmed. Mapped every chamber, documented every inscription. The knowledge survived even if the stones didn't. Morgana's grip on my arm shifted, her fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture that felt shockingly intimate. The Temple of Winds contained texts from the First Age. Knowledge that predated even our bloodlines. If you preserved that information, she trailed off, looking at her sisters. Do you understand what he's done? What he has? I'm beginning to, Seraphine murmured, her crimson eyes locked on mine. The question is, does he understand what he stumbled into tonight? I joked about being single, I said, my sense of absurdity finally catching up with the situation. And apparently angered some cosmic force that decided I needed immediate, overwhelming correction to that status. All three sisters laughed, genuinely laughed, and the tension that had held the courtyard suspended broke like a snapped string. The crowd released collective breath, conversations resumed, and someone started playing music from somewhere within the estate. But the sisters didn't release me. So here's how this works, Seraphine said, her voice taking on a formal quality. You've invoked the clause of unattachment, probably without meaning to, but vampiric law doesn't care about intention. When a mortal at our gala declares themselves single without qualification, any vampire may claim right of courtship. Usually one vampire claims. Sometimes two, which leads to duels or negotiations. 3 is, Morgana paused, searching for words. Unprecedented in the last 5 centuries. The last time all 3 daughters of Volcrest agreed on a potential companion, the resulting courtship reshaped the political landscape of an entire continent. No pressure, Ravenna whispered in my ear, though I could hear the grin in her voice. What does courtship mean exactly? I asked, because I desperately needed clarification before this situation spiraled further beyond my comprehension. It means you stay, Seraphine said simply. Here in the estate. As our guest. We get to know you, you get to know us, and we discover whether this mutual fascination has substance or is merely novelty. And if I refuse? The question hung in the air for a heartbeat. Then you walk away, Morgana said, surprising me. We don't force companionship. Ever. Free will is the cornerstone of any meaningful bond. But, her smile turned mysterious. I don't think you want to refuse. She was right, and that terrified me more than anything else that had happened. Because standing there, held between 3 of the most dangerous beings in the known world, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years of wandering, curiosity. Not about places or ruins or forgotten civilizations, but about people. These strange, immortal, magnificent creatures who'd somehow seen something in me worth their attention. How long does courtship last? I asked. As long as necessary, Ravenna said. Could be weeks. Could be months. Could be years, though I hope not because I'm notoriously impatient. What happens after? After, Seraphine said carefully, we decide. Together. All four of us. Whether to make the arrangement permanent. Permanent meaning. Meaning you become part of House Valcrest, Morgana finished. Granted extended life, not immortality but centuries rather than decades. Bound to us through blood and oath. Transformed from mortal to something more. The weight of that statement settled over me like a physical force. They were offering me everything I'd secretly dreamed of during long nights in forgotten ruins. Time. Enough time to map not just the world as it was, but to watch it change, to document the endless transformation I'd always known existed but never had years enough to properly observe. But the cost. And all three of you would have to agree? I asked. If even one of you decided against it? Then you'd leave memory intact, with our gratitude and a considerable amount of gold to ease your remaining mortal years, Seraphine said. We're many things, Aldrich Thorne, but we're not cruel to those who've done us no wrong. Usually, Ravenna added helpfully. Usually, Morgana confirmed with a slight smile. I looked at each of them in turn. Seraphine with her fire and command, her presence like standing before a barely contained inferno. Morgana with her cool wisdom and hidden depths, her violet eyes promising secrets I couldn't begin to imagine. Ravenna with her wild energy and dangerous smile, her entire being radiating barely controlled chaos. They were offering me the unknown. The greatest unexplored territory of all, connection. I need to know something first, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. Why me? There are hundreds of people here. Nobles, merchants, scholars, warriors. Why the wandering cartographer with nothing to his name but journals and an aging horse? Seraphine exchanged glances with her sisters, some unspoken communication passing between them. Because, she finally said, you understand what we understand. That nothing lasts forever. That all empires fall, all beauty fades, all certainty crumbles. Most mortals fear that truth or deny it. Most vampires pretend immortality shields them from it. Her grip on my arm softened, becoming almost gentle. But you've built your entire life around accepting impermanence and documenting it anyway. Creating meaning in the face of inevitable change. We've been alive for centuries, Morgana added softly. We've watched civilizations rise and fall. We've seen beauty born and destroyed. We've loved and lost more times than you can imagine. Her violet eyes held ancient sorrow. And we're tired of companions who expect forever to mean something it doesn't. Who confuse extended life with eternal stability. You already know nothing is permanent, Ravenna finished, her chin still on my shoulder. So you won't shatter when you realize we can't promise you a fairy tale ending. Just a really, really long and interesting story. The honesty in their words struck something deep in my chest. They weren't offering me fantasy. They were offering me reality, just stretched across a vastly different timescale. The gala continues for 3 more hours, Seraphine said. After that, we retire to the estate proper. You have until then to decide. Stay and begin courtship or walk away with our respect and no hard feelings. 3 hours to decide my entire future? 3 hours to decide your immediate future, Morgana corrected. Your entire future is unknowable, you said so yourself. Maps are lies, remember? So we're just asking you to take the first step into unmapped territory. Ravenna's arms unwrapped from my waist, though her presence remained close. No more pressure tonight. We've made our interest clear, probably scared you halfway to an early grave in the process, and now you get to be a normal guest at an abnormal party. She stepped back, her wings folding against her back. Drink, eat, enjoy the entertainment. We'll find you when the gala ends. And if you decide to leave, Seraphine said, releasing my arm, walk straight to the gates. No one will stop you. You have our word, which carries considerably more weight than any mortal oath. Morgana was the last to let go, her fingers trailing along mine before finally separating. Whatever you decide, Aldrich Thorne, it's been a pleasure meeting someone who sees the world clearly. Then, as suddenly as they'd appeared, they were gone, melting back into the shadows and mist, their departure as dramatic as their arrival. The courtyard erupted into frenzied conversation. I stood frozen, trying to process what had just happened, aware that every eye was on me, every tongue discussing the bizarre scene they'd witnessed. Someone pressed a glass of wine into my hand. A merchant clapped me on the back with forced joviality. A noble woman asked breathlessly what it had been like, standing that close to the Valcrest sisters. I answered automatically, my mind elsewhere. 3 hours to decide. 3 hours to choose between the life I knew, solitary, mobile, safe in its predictability, and something utterly unknown. I drank the wine. It was excellent, probably worth more than I earned in a month. The irony wasn't lost on me, standing in a vampire's courtyard, drinking their wine, contemplating joining their household. The next 3 hours passed in a blur of observations and internal debate. I watched the gala's entertainment. Dancers whose movements defied human capability, musicians playing instruments I couldn't name, displays of magic that drew gasps from the crowd. I noticed the way the estate servants moved with inhuman grace, the way certain guests bore barely visible marks on their necks, willing donors, I realized, who'd come to offer blood in exchange for gold or favors. This was a world I'd studied from the outside, documented in my journals as one might catalog a dangerous but fascinating ecosystem. And now I was being offered entry. Not as an observer but as a participant. I thought about my journals, currently stored in a rented room in Raven Hollow. Years of work, documenting places that would soon cease to exist. What would I do with centuries? How many more civilizations could I observe, record, preserve? But more than that, I thought about the look in Morgana's eyes when she spoke of impermanence. The exhaustion in Seraphine's voice when she mentioned fairy tale endings. The genuine delight in Ravenna's laugh when I'd spoken honestly. They were old. Not just in years, but in experience, in loss, in the deep weariness that comes from watching everything you build eventually crumble. And somehow they'd seen something in me they needed. Not a cure, there was no curing mortality, even extended mortality, but maybe a companion who understood from the start that all stories end, and chose to live them beautifully anyway. The church bell in distant Raven Hollow tolled midnight. Around me, guests began departing, offering elaborate thanks to hosts they'd never see. The gala was ending. Decision time. I could walk to those gates. Return to my maps and my wandering. Safe. Predictable. Alone. Or I could stay. My feet carried me forward but not toward the gates. Instead, I found myself walking deeper into the estate, following an instinct I couldn't name, moving through corridors of stone and shadow until I reached a courtyard deeper within the grounds. They were waiting there, of course. Standing in a triangle formation, moonlight painting their forms in silver and shadow. Their wings were fully extended now, creating a canopy of membrane and bone that blocked out the stars. "You stayed," Seraphine said, and I heard genuine surprise in her voice. "I stayed," I confirmed, stepping into the space between them. "Not because I'm certain this is right. Not because I'm unafraid. But because the best maps are drawn by people who walk into the unknown and document what they find there." Morgana smiled, slow and genuine. "And what do you think you'll find here, Aldrich Thorne?" "I have absolutely no idea," I admitted. "But I'm curious enough to find out." Ravenna laughed, that crystalline sound of breaking glass and silver. "Oh, I'm going to enjoy this." Seraphine stepped forward, extending her hand not to grab but to offer. "Then welcome to House Valcrest, Aldrich Thorne. The courtship begins now." I took her hand, felt the cool strength of her grip, and knew my life had just pivoted in ways I couldn't begin to map. The next weeks blurred together in a cascade of new experiences. The Valcrest estate revealed itself to be less a house and more a self-contained world, vast chambers connected by corridors that seemed to rearrange themselves when I wasn't looking. I learned later that Morgana had woven spatial enchantments throughout the structure, creating impossible geometries that protected the family's privacy while allowing for efficiency of movement. My quarters were in the East Wing, a suite of rooms that would have housed a noble family comfortably. Stone walls were softened by tapestries depicting battles I didn't recognize, maps of territories that might have been real or fantastical. A massive desk had been provided, along with fresh parchment, inks in every conceivable color, and tools for map-making that were finer than anything I'd owned. But I spent little time there. Because the sisters were relentless in their courtship? Tension? Study? I still wasn't entirely sure what to call it. Seraphine approached the situation with military precision. Our time together was structured, purposeful, designed to assess compatibility through action rather than words. She took me to the estate's training grounds, a vast complex where the night guard drilled and sparred, and watched me observe with the same intensity I'd shown when surveying ruins. "You see patterns," she noted on the third day, her crimson eyes tracking my gaze as I watched soldiers execute complex formations. "You're not just watching, you're analyzing, building mental structures to understand the underlying logic." "It's what I do," I said. "Everything has patterns. Water follows the path of least resistance, roots grow toward nutrients, armies move according to strategic principles. Understanding the pattern helps predict what comes next." She'd smiled at that, a rare expression of approval. Then she'd handed me a practice sword. "Show me," she commanded. I'd stared at the weapon. "I'm a cartographer, not a warrior. You've survived places that killed trained soldiers. You didn't do that through luck alone." She'd drawn her own blade, a magnificent weapon that seemed to drink light. "Defend yourself. I'll move slowly." What followed was less a combat lesson and more a revelation. Seraphine didn't just teach technique, she taught philosophy. Each movement was a decision, each stance a statement about how you approached conflict. She moved like poetry written in steel, and gradually, painfully, I began to understand the language. "Better," she said after I'd managed to deflect one of her strikes without ending up disarmed. "You're not trying to overpower. You're adapting, redirecting, using my momentum against me." "Like rivers around stone," I panted, already exhausted. "The water doesn't fight the rock, it just finds another way." Her expression had softened then, something almost like warmth entering those crimson eyes. Most warriors never understand that. They think combat is about dominance. But true mastery is about adaptation. We'd continued these sessions daily. I never became skilled, that would have taken years I hadn't lived. But I became competent enough to understand what she was teaching me, how to survive in a world where threats could materialize from anywhere. And slowly, between the clang of steel and the exhaustion of training, we talked. She told me about her centuries, about wars fought and peace brokered, about the weight of being the eldest daughter, the one expected to lead with certainty even when certainty was a comfortable lie. "I'm tired," she admitted one evening, her guard lowered in a rare moment of vulnerability. "Not physically, we don't tire that way. But tired of always being strong, always being certain, always being the one who knows what to do." She looked at me, then really looked. "You understand that, don't you? The exhaustion of pretending you have answers when you're really just making educated guesses?" "Every map I've ever drawn," I'd said quietly. "I present them as truth, but they're just my best interpretation of complex reality. People trust them because they need to believe someone knows the territory. But I'm often as lost as anyone." She'd taken my hand then, her cool fingers interlacing with mine. "Then perhaps we can be lost together sometimes. Take turns pretending to know the way." Morgana's approach was entirely different. Where Seraphine sought to understand me through action, Morgana pursued understanding through knowledge. The estate's library was her domain, a vast, vertical chamber that stretched up impossibly high, shelves carved directly into stone walls, filled with texts from every era and civilization. The collection made my breath catch. I'd heard rumors of the Volcrest Library, but rumors couldn't capture the sheer scope of accumulated knowledge. "Everything we've collected across the centuries," Morgana said, noting my awe. "Books, scrolls, tablets, journals. Some from civilizations you've documented. Many from places that have been forgotten so completely that even their names are lost." She gestured to a specific section. Your journals are here now, by the way. We had them retrieved from Raven Hollow, with payment left for your landlord, naturally. We're not thieves. I'd felt a spike of alarm. Those journals were my life's work, but she'd raised a calming hand. Only to preserve them, she assured me. And to read them, yes, I won't lie about that. I wanted to understand how you see the world. Her violet eyes had studied me with unnerving intensity. You write beautifully, Aldrich. Not just descriptions but philosophy. Every ruined city becomes a meditation on impermanence. Every dried riverbed a reflection on change. Over the following weeks, we'd spent countless hours in that library. She'd show me texts written in dead languages, test whether I could decode them using linguistic principles. I'd share my observations about civilizations, and she'd fill in historical context I'd never known, connecting threads across centuries I'd had no way to perceive. This city you documented in the ashen wastes, she'd said one day, pointing to one of my maps. The one with the circular tower arrangement? Yes. I estimated it was about 400 years old based on architectural degradation and... Try 4,000, she'd corrected gently. That was an outpost of the Velcaran Empire. They fell long before current human civilizations rose. The towers weren't buildings. They were reality anchors meant to stabilize dimensional weak points. I'd stared at her, then back at my map, my entire understanding of that site recontextualizing in an instant. I had no idea. I thought. You thought correctly given the information available, she'd said. That's the tragedy and beauty of mortal scholarship. You work with fragments and still construct meaning. She paused, searching for words. Humbling. We vampires have the luxury of long memory, but we've grown complacent. You mortals, forced to reconstruct knowledge each generation, often see patterns we've stopped noticing. She'd moved closer then, her cool presence beside me as we bent over ancient maps. Teach me, she'd whispered. Teach me to see the world as you do. Fresh, curious, unburdened by the weight of knowing too much. And I tried, sharing my methodologies, my ways of approaching unknown territories. In return, she'd opened reserves of knowledge I'd never dreamed existed, showing me the deep history beneath the surface history, the forgotten context that made the present comprehensible. Late one night, surrounded by texts and maps, she'd asked me a question that cut to the core of everything. Why do you document places that are dying or dead? Why not map living cities, thriving trade routes? I'd considered carefully before answering. Because living places are constantly being mapped by others. They have commercial value, political importance. But dying places, forgotten places, if I don't document them, no one will. And when they're finally gone, it'll be as if they never existed at all. Her hand had come to rest on mine, her touch sending familiar coolness through my skin. You're fighting oblivion, she'd said softly. One map at a time, one journal entry at a time. Preserving memory against the entropic tide that erases everything. Isn't that what this library does? I'd countered. Yes, she'd admitted. Which is why I understand you. We're doing the same work across different timescales. You preserve decades and centuries. I preserve millennia. But we're both standing against the same enemy, forgetting. She'd leaned her head against my shoulder then, a gesture of intimacy that had surprised us both. Stay with us, Aldrich. Not just for the courtship, but after. We need someone who remembers why this matters. Why preservation isn't just hoarding, but an act of defiance against meaninglessness. Ravenna, unsurprisingly, had no structured plan whatsoever. I'd find her in random places throughout the estate at random times. The training yard at midnight, dancing through blade forms too fast for my eyes to track. The roof at dawn, watching the sun rise from beneath a protective spell that kept its rays from harming her. The kitchens at dinner, charming stories from servants who clearly adored her despite, or perhaps because of, her chaotic nature. Come on, mapmaker, she'd said one evening, appearing in my quarters without warning. You've been cooped up with books and training for weeks. Time for actual adventure. Adventure where? I'd asked, learning to be wary of that particular gleam in her eyes. The dead forest. 5 miles north. Absolutely infested with things that want to kill you. It'll be fun. It had been terrifyingly exactly what she'd promised. The dead forest earned its name from trees that had petrified centuries ago, their stone forms creating a maze of mineral branches and crystallized leaves. It was also home to shadow beasts, creatures that lived in the spaces between darkness and light, predators that hunted anything warm-blooded foolish enough to enter their territory. Ravenna had dragged me there, armed me with a blade I barely knew how to use, and then proceeded to teach me survival through trial by fire. "Don't think," she'd instructed as a shadow beast lunged from the darkness. "React. Your body knows more than your mind when death is seconds away." I'd rolled more through panic than skill, the creature's claws missing me by inches. Ravenna had eliminated it with casual efficiency, then immediately stepped back, letting another approach. "Again," she'd commanded. "Faster this time." It was brutal, exhausting, and absolutely exhilarating. She pushed me to edges I didn't know I had, forced me to discover capabilities I'd never needed to access. And all the while she laughed, not mockingly but with genuine joy, as if my survival attempts were the most entertaining thing she'd witnessed in decades. Later, sitting among the stone trees, bloodied but alive, she'd shared her perspective. "My sisters think I'm reckless," she'd said, cleaning her blade with practiced ease. "And they're right. But they don't understand that immortality without risk becomes prison. If you can't die, you stop living. You just exist." She'd pointed her blade at me. "You're mortal. Every day could be your last. That should be terrifying, but instead you walk into cursed ruins and document them. You risk everything for knowledge that won't even benefit you personally. Why? Because the alternative is staying safe and never discovering anything," I'd said. "Yes, I could live a long, secure life in a city somewhere. But I'd spend that life wondering what I'd missed. What ruins I hadn't explored. What knowledge I'd left undiscovered." Her grin had been fierce and approving. "See? You get it? Life isn't about duration. It's about intensity. Seraphine and Morgana, they've lived so long they've forgotten that. They're careful now. Measured. They've lost the fire. They're cautious because they've lost people they cared about," I'd suggested gently. "Pain teaches caution. Pain should teach you to squeeze more joy from the time you have," she'd countered. "Not to wrap yourself in cotton and wait for the universe to bore you to death." She'd stood then, offering me her hand. "Promise me something, mapmaker. If you join us, really join us, blood and oath and centuries, promise me you won't let immortality kill your curiosity. Don't let infinite time make you stop taking risks." I'd taken her hand, let her pull me to my feet. "I promise. If you promise to occasionally let careful planning prevent completely avoidable disasters." She'd laughed, that crystalline sound echoing through the stone forest. "Deal. We'll balance each other. I'll keep you from getting too safe, you'll keep me from getting us all killed. It's perfect." The weeks accumulated into months. The initial strangeness of living among vampires faded into routine, though routine among the Volcrests was never boring. I documented the estate itself, creating maps of its impossible architecture, journals describing daily life in a household that existed outside normal mortal experience. The sisters changed. Or perhaps I simply saw them more clearly. Seraphine's strength masked deep loneliness, the isolation of command. She'd been leading House Volcrest for so long that she'd forgotten how to be anything but its shield and sword. Teaching her to lower her guard, to admit uncertainty, became my unexpected mission. And slowly, painfully, she began to trust me with her vulnerabilities. Morgana's knowledge masked equal loneliness, the isolation of understanding too much. She'd accumulated so much information that she'd lost the ability to simply experience without analyzing. Teaching her to observe without dissecting, to feel without categorizing, became my gift to her. And gradually she began to rediscover wonder. Ravenna's chaos masked the deepest loneliness of all, the isolation of being perpetually misunderstood. Her sisters loved her but didn't truly see her, dismissing her recklessness without recognizing it as philosophy. Teaching her that calculated risk and wild abandon could coexist, that planning didn't eliminate joy, became my bridge to her. And incrementally she began to trust that wildness and wisdom weren't mutually exclusive. And me? I changed too. The man who'd walked into the Crimson Gala had been someone who documented life without fully participating in it. Safe behind the lens of observation, cataloging the world without letting it touch him too deeply. The man emerging from months of courtship was someone who'd learned to live in the moments he documented. To engage rather than just observe. To risk connection even knowing nothing lasted forever. 6 months after that fateful joke, I stood once again in the main courtyard. The same obsidian fountain, the same crimson banners, the same Gothic architecture reaching for an unreachable sky. But everything had changed. The three sisters stood before me, not grabbing but simply present, their wings folded, their expressions open in ways I'd never seen that first night. So, Seraphine said quietly, 6 months of courtship. We've trained together, studied together, fought together. We've shared our histories and listened to yours. We've argued and laughed and occasionally wanted to strangle each other. Figuratively, Morgana added. Mostly figuratively. Speak for yourself, Ravenna muttered, though her grin betrayed her. Seraphine continued, her crimson eyes locked on mine. The courtship period is traditionally 6 months to a year. We're at the point where decisions become necessary. Not immediately, we're not rushing you, but soon. Do you want this? Morgana asked simply. Truly? Not the immortality, not the power, not the safety. But this. This strange, complicated, occasionally infuriating dynamic we've built together. Because if you do, Ravenna added, it's going to be permanent. The blood oath isn't reversible. You'll be tied to us across centuries. And we're warning you now, we're difficult. We argue constantly. We have baggage that predates your civilization. We're going to drive you absolutely insane sometimes. I'd known this conversation was coming. Had prepared for it during long nights of contemplation. And my answer had crystallized with surprising clarity. I was alone before I met you, I said carefully. Not lonely, I'd made peace with solitude. But alone. Moving through the world as an observer, documenting connections without forming them. Safe. Predictable. Manageable. I stepped closer to them, close enough to see the individual facets of color in their eyes. Seraphine's shifting crimsons, Morgana's layered violets, Ravenna's sharp blacks. These past 6 months have been none of those things. Safe? I've nearly died at least a dozen times. Predictable? I have no idea what any given day will bring. Manageable? You three are the most overwhelming people I've ever encountered. Seraphine's expression had become carefully neutral, braced for rejection. And I've never been happier, I finished. The courtyard seemed to hold its breath. You've taught me that maps aren't just about places, they're about connections. Territories don't exist in isolation. They're defined by relationships to other territories, by the paths that connect them, by the people who move between them. I looked at each of them in turn. Seraphine, you've taught me that strength isn't the absence of vulnerability, it's the courage to be vulnerable anyway. That true command isn't about having all the answers, it's about being honest when you don't. Her crimson eyes had grown suspiciously bright. Morgana, you've taught me that knowledge without wonder is just data. That understanding the world deeply doesn't diminish its magic. It reveals magic you didn't know existed. Her violet eyes shimmered with unshed tears, or whatever vampires produced instead. Ravenna, you've taught me that carefully calculated risk is still risk, and that's beautiful. That immortality is wasted on those who forget how to truly live. That chaos and care can coexist. Her fierce grin had softened into something almost tender. So yes, I said firmly. I want this. I want you. All three of you, with all your complications and contradictions and centuries of baggage. I want to map territories no one else will ever see, the territories of connection, of love that spans timescales mortals can't imagine, of family built across different species and understanding. The oath is permanent, Seraphine warned, though hope had entered her voice. Once given, it can't be taken back. You'll be bound to House Volcrest, specifically to the three of us, for as long as you live, which will be a very, very long time. All stories end eventually, I said. But that's no reason not to tell them beautifully while they last. And this, I gestured between us. This is a story worth telling. Worth living. Worth every risk and complication and inevitable future heartbreak when entropy finally catches even us. Morgana stepped forward first, her cool hand cupping my face. You're certain? Because once this begins, there's no going back to your old life. The road won't call to you the same way. You'll be changed. Fundamentally. I've been changing since the moment I made that stupid joke, I said. I'm not the same man who walked into the gala. And I don't want to be. Ravenna appeared at my shoulder, her arms wrapping around me from behind in a now familiar gesture. Last chance to run, mapmaker. We're about to mark you in ways that go deeper than skin. You'll carry us with you forever. We'll carry you with us. It's beautiful and terrifying, and there's no manual for how to make it work. The best territories never have accurate maps, I said. You navigate them through trial and error by learning the landscape step by step. I'm willing to learn. Seraphine's smile could have lit the night. Then kneel, Aldrich Thorn. And let us show you what it means to be truly bound to House Valcrest. I knelt. What followed was ritual older than kingdoms. Words and languages that predated human civilization, spoken by all three sisters in perfect unison. Their voices wove together into harmony that resonated in my bones, rewriting something fundamental in my structure. Seraphine drew a blade across her palm, that same magnificent weapon from our training. Her blood welled crimson black, somehow darker than mortal blood, and she offered her hand. I drank and the world shifted. Morgana followed, her blood carrying violet undertones that tasted of ancient knowledge and deeper mysteries. The world shifted again, dimensions I hadn't perceived suddenly becoming visible at the edges of my vision. Ravenna was last, her blood bright red shot through with threads of wild energy. The final shift nearly broke me, sensation overloading every sense until I couldn't distinguish between sound and color, between touch and taste. Through it all they held me. Seraphine's hand on my shoulder, Morgana's on my back, Ravenna's arms still around me from behind. Anchoring me as my body rewrote itself, as mortality became something more without losing its essential nature. When awareness returned, I was still kneeling, but everything had changed. Colors were different, richer with more nuance. I could hear conversations from distant parts of the estate, distinguish between them effortlessly. The scent of the night air carried information I'd never perceived, moisture content, distant storms, the particular stone the estate was built from. But more than that, I could feel them. Not just their physical presence but their beings. Seraphine's steady strength like bedrock beneath stormy seas. Morgana's vast knowledge like an ocean of carefully organized thought. Ravenna's wild energy like lightning seeking ground. And they could feel me. I knew this instinctively, could sense their awareness of my consciousness like they could sense mine of theirs. Welcome, Seraphine said softly, to House Valcrest. You are ours now and we are yours. Bound across however many centuries the universe grants us. The oath is sealed, Morgana whispered, her voice carrying harmonics I hadn't heard before, or hadn't been able to hear. You'll age but slowly. You'll remain mortal, but that mortality is now measured in centuries rather than decades. You have time, Aldrich. Time to map every territory that calls to you. And you have us, Ravenna added, her chin finding its familiar place on my shoulder. For better or worse, through every adventure and disaster. We're stuck with each other now. I stood, my body feeling simultaneously the same and entirely different. The sisters' hands found mine, Seraphine's right hand, Morgana's left, while Ravenna stayed pressed against my back, her arms around my waist. So what now? I asked, my voice carrying new resonances. Now, Seraphine said with a smile, we figure out how to make this work. Day by day, year by year, century by century. No maps, no guidelines, just four people navigating uncharted territory together. Sounds complicated, I observed. Sounds perfect, Morgana countered. Sounds like the best adventure yet, Ravenna finished. And standing there, bound to three impossible creatures of legend, I realized the cosmic force I'd joked about that first night, the one that had corrected my single status with overwhelming force, had done me the greatest favor of my existence. I'd spent my life documenting connections without forming them, mapping territories without claiming any as home. Now I had both. The estate stretched around us, stone and shadow and impossible architecture. Beyond its walls, the world continued its endless transformation, civilizations rising and falling, territories shifting, all the impermanent beauty I'd dedicated my life to preserving. And I would continue that work. But no longer alone. The three sisters, my companions, my partners, my family forged by choice rather than blood, would walk those territories with me. Seraphine teaching me strength, Morgana sharing accumulated wisdom, Ravenna ensuring I never forgot how to truly live. Years would become decades. Decades would become centuries. And through it all, we would navigate together, 4 points creating a constellation of connection in the vast dark of existence. All maps are temporary. All territories transform. All stories eventually end. But while they last, they can be beautiful. And ours was just beginning. Somewhere in the estate, a clock chimed. The night stretched ahead, infinite with possibility. Tomorrow I would return to my journals, begin documenting this new territory of immortal connection. I would map the estate completely, catalog its impossible geometry, preserve its secrets in ink and parchment. But tonight, we simply stood together in the courtyard where it had all begun. Where a careless joke had become cosmic intervention. Where 3 vampire sisters had heard, "I'm single," and collectively decided that particular status needed immediate correction. "Thank you," I said quietly. "For what?" Seraphine asked. "For grabbing my arms that night. For not letting me walk away. For teaching me that the best territories are the ones we explore together." Morgana's laugh was soft and warm. "Thank you for being someone worth grabbing. For understanding impermanence and choosing to build beauty within it anyway. Thank you for making immortality interesting again," Ravenna added. "For reminding us why we bother preserving anything at all." The moon hung overhead, silver light painting the courtyard in shades of gray and black. The crimson banners fluttered in wind that came from everywhere and nowhere. The estate settled around us, ancient stone content in its purpose. And 4 people, 3 ancient vampires and 1 newly transformed mortal, stood at the center of it all, bound by oath and choice, ready to face whatever centuries the universe had planned. No maps. No certainty. No promises of forever. Just the commitment to walk forward together, documenting the journey, building meaning in the face of entropy, creating connection in the vast emptiness of existence. It was enough. It was everything. And it was, I realized with profound certainty, exactly what I'd been searching for all along, even when I hadn't known I was searching at all. The joke had been simple. I'm single. The truth was infinitely more complex. I had been alone. But I wasn't anymore. And that made all the difference.